And Abe, he loved working in the clinic because he loved seeing kids. He loved taking care of kids, but he also loved being with residents and teaching residents in the clinic. Even in his late 70s, he was still working clinic and work on the in the wards in the clinic at Harborview, because he really loved medicine and loved pediatrics and loved.
And Abe, he was always great to work with. There were, he always played classical music all throughout the day, in his office. You just, hear this music blaring out, which was wonderful. It was very calming. And I can't remember, one really kind of funny time I went into Abe and I was complaining about something, some program I couldn't get, going in the direction I wanted to go in. And I think I had on, a long skirt that I had since the 1960s, and, kind of maybe the 60s type top, on. And Abe looked at me and he said, "Now the problem with you is you've never gotten out of the 1960s.
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, Abe, I never saw any reason to get out of the 1960s.
He loved that about you.
We had a lot of fun.
The one story that most leaps to mind for me is my first rotation through Harborview Hospital. Right?
Yeah.
For those of you, anybody listening to this, I assume many people will know what Harborview, but the sort of regional trauma center and not the most pediatric sort of friendly environment, very different than Seattle Children's, where we did most of our training. And it was a somewhat terrifying environment because the kids that did come there were coming there for very ominous reasons, and usually victims of trauma, and so were quite seriously ill, and it was not the emergency room at Harborview was, and I imagine still is, a very scary place because there's we saw a lot of terrible things. And I remember the few of us, the block of us who were going into this rotation and being in a small windowless conference room in Harborview, and we're all kind of wide-eyed, and Abe really talked to us and he said, "Look, you've spent the first year, your internship year, learning the one thing that you really have to know as a pediatrician, which is you walk into a room and this kid is either, going to be fine. In other words, there might be something wrong and maybe you'll do something, but this kid is okay, or there's something seriously wrong." And that instinct of walking into a room and knowing what that fork in the road is, this is a kid who's going to be okay, so nothing, we're going to do something and it's all going to turn out fine, and oh my goodness, like this is a full-on emergency. That distinction was what we had learned, and that we needed to believe in ourselves that we did know that. And so he was sort of distilling what an entire internship had meant, which is learning that moment. And at the same time reassuring us that we knew more than we realized, and that we didn't need to be scared going into Harborview. And it was such a brilliant combination of sort of teaching and reassurance and building confidence. And that's, that's sort of the magic mix of becoming a physician, I guess. And one of the other things that I've really learned from Abe is that, systems can be well-meaning in the protection of children, but miss the point, right? And that we needed, at the end of the day, to realize that, parents are fallible and may make mistakes, but that we needed to reserve judgment, right? That we need to be very careful about the way we judged people.
Yeah.
And I just, that has stayed with me, right? It's really easy to sort of, the state needs to intervene and somebody knows better than the parents, and, sometimes that is needed, right? I mean, it's not, and Abe was never saying never, right? He wasn't saying like, but he was just injecting a note of skepticism that we should realize that, you know, at the end of the day, you know, a parent can make a mistake and something might happen to a kid, but that didn't mean ill intent, and that didn't mean that somehow someone could do better. And I often think about that. I mean, that's not I want to come down, you know, seeming irrational about this. There are obviously times where the state needs to intervene and parents are unfit, but Abe asked us to question that seriously and really think through the perspective of a parent who was before you and what they were trying to do. And that I think is very powerful and has stayed with me, you know, even though I'm not doing clinical pediatrics day to day, just in the way I look at how to refrain from judgment as you interact with parents and kids.
So he was my attending, and I called him, Abe, I've got this family here, and these children have a rash, and I don't know what I'm doing. And he said, so why are you calling me? I said, because you're my attending. And he said, that doesn't mean I know what this is. That doesn't mean I need to be there showing you. I am not the person for that. You need to turn to the senior residents. They'll help you out. They learn the hard way. That's what's going to happen. Now, I have to get back. I forget what symphony he was listening to. I have to get back to this. The good part's coming. It was like click. Bedside rounds were a real treat with him because he would often have the resident do the exam. It wasn't like your dad would do a whole lot of the exams when I was there, but his fund of knowledge and his understanding of the history of medicine and his ability to connect where we got to today, you know, why treatment today looks so different than what it was before, was really refreshing. And I realized over time, that's an anchor that we get as people in training in the medical profession. You can read the latest protocols for how to assess and treat diseases. You can do what is now sort of au courant. But if you're divorced completely from how we got here, if you forget the history of medicine piece of it, and you don't have an appreciation for the struggles that got us to where we are today, you don't have much of a foundation. Anyway, so that I really got from him, and I found those conversations endlessly fascinating. Yeah, he also helped me become comfortable not knowing everything. There's that security where as long as I know almost everything I need to know right now, I'll always have an answer for new situations that pop up. And of course, that's not how it works either. He definitely helped me get comfortable with instinct and using what little I did have in order to head in the right direction with diagnosis and treatment. And then I think the other thing I took away from Abe, much more than most mentors, was before patient-centered care was a thing people talked about, before making sure including the family in discussions of treatment like quality of life or goals of care, he was doing that. He was doing it in his own way. Nobody would have mistaken him for you know, a palliative care physician sitting down, allowing these pregnant pauses to take time until somebody came up with their own ideas. But he really, really was focused on the patient and the family. And he understood if you don't include them in this process, and you're not addressing the concerns and questions they have, even if you don't think it's relevant, that itself is something you have to get over. Because if you haven't addressed their questions and needs, no matter how great a job you think you've done, you have failed. I remember internship and second year were extremely rough for us. That was when the E. coli outbreak happened with Jack in the Box.
Oh, wow.
It was just, never want to go back there again. So of course we would bemoan our existence, and we would rant and rave about how we didn't have a life and we weren't ever leaving the campus. And I'll never forget your dad. He says, here's what I don't understand. You call yourself residents. We were residents. Do you know what that means? It
Yeah.
means you are resident in the hospital. It's your home. That's where you live. You don't leave. You're not a resident. In the middle of this moment where you're like, oh, my life sucks so bad. And he's like, yeah, but you don't live here like I did. And I love that.
Yeah, you're right. He really did love Harborview because it really takes care of the most vulnerable people in our society. And really it kind of attracted docs like your dad that were a little bit of iconoclasts, didn't necessarily fit well in the corporate model that medicine has become, and really wanted to kind of work outside of the corporate model and really directly, what can we do to help families and make communities healthier and safer? And there are a lot of people at Harborview that were like that, and he really fit in so well with Harborview. It was he loved Children's Hospital as well. Don't get me wrong, but I think he really appreciated being at Harborview for the last part of his career. I mean, we had fun there. We kind of were of one mind and really kind of felt what we were doing was important, and they supported each other in doing that. There was. I mean, I think that at times your dad. I mean, he's I said at the memorial, he was a curmudgeon in some ways, and he pissed off people at times when he wanted to get something done, and at times I got caught in the crossfire, and that felt
because you're such a nice person. I think that's one of the reasons you and Dad were such a great team.
And that at times is a little uncomfortable. I don't know if we ever argued over it, but at times, it was uncomfortable. But no, I think we felt we saw eye to eye on most things there. At the core, he was a doctor, and he, like me, really took his ideas of what to work on from what did he see, what patients did he see in the wards or in the emergency department. I mean, remember that one of the things he's most famous for is the Flammable Fabrics Act. And that was really from a patient that he took care of at Children's.
Yeah.
Before there was a separate burn unit at Harborview, these kids came to Children's Hospital and took care of a little girl whose nightgown caught on fire when she was close to a gas stove or a flammable stove. And so that really seared in his mind that needs to try to do something about it. And that really led to the Flammable Fabrics Act. I think that the same thing with the Sudden Infant Death Syndrome Act, that was really from taking care of these kids and seeing those patients and those parents in the emergency room that really led to him trying to do something about Sudden Infant Death Syndrome. It was really that his identity as a physician, taking care of patients, working with residents, that really drove Abe to do the work that he did.